I brought up a subject on a video a couple weeks ago that I said that if anyone was interested in hearing me talk about this subject, just let me know and I'd be happy to do so because we all know I talk for days. And someone absolutely did, and even a couple people even private messaged me about it and asked me in private, and I gave them kind of like a very abbreviated summary of what was going on. But today I'm making a little video to respond to that, and this will probably end up being a solo podcast for Keep Comments Just a Stink podcast because I'm probably going to go on for a while. But basically, what today I'm going to talk about, because it's going to get probably a little deep, about what's going on in the reptile hobby, in the community, things that have been going on lately, and what is going to be coming, both in the immediate future and possibly things to come. I mean, I know I'm just like one kind of nobody on the internet right now. But I've been talking to a lot of people in the hobby and a little outside the hobby, kind of from every aspect of it, from people who've been doing this, some of like the old school guys, as to well as some of the people who are more in like the big industrial part of the industry, I guess you could say, who are doing different things and have been doing things for a while, as well as a lot of like the newer people or the people that are really starting to take the community in a different and what I think is a better direction. Because living in your own little bubble, I don't think is ever good. You want to be able to hear information from a lot of different sources and views, both about whatever you're into, as well as just kind of the world as a whole. You don't have to agree with everything, but you can always take that information to help form your opinions and have a more knowledgeable base about to form your opinions and what you want to do with that knowledge. And so, with that in mind, this is, I was asked to be a guest on a podcast. It was more of like an Aquarius podcast, but they're starting to get other people from outside of there. And I was asked to talk about a little bit about the reptile community and kind of what I do in the reptile community. And one of the questions that they asked me, which we didn't like pre-rehearse any of these, I was just kind of flying off the cuff because I can do that. And they asked, what, if any, would be a reptile species you would want removed from the hobby? And again, hadn't thought about this at all. It was just right off the cuff, and I said red-eared sliders. And that actually kind of took me aback for a second. And it made me think about things where, and I mentioned this in the beginning of a video a couple weeks ago, where, are there any reptiles in this hobby that shouldn't be? And I thought about that for a long time. And what I kind of came to the conclusion is that I don't know if necessarily there shouldn't be, and like there should be no of there should be species that are barred from being kept privately. But I think that there are definitely quite a few out there that are much too prevalent, much too popular for their own good, for the good of the people who keep them, as well as for this industry and this hobby. And in that video, I talk about that a little bit. This is my opinion about these things, and I gave alternatives to those things that are a little bit better. And it's something that I like. This industry, this hobby, is something that I got into a little bit kind of later in life, where us 30-something-year-old millennials, we all are just hopefully now trying to really figure out what we want to do, because it's been such a really weird world. And I never thought that I wanted to be a person that goes out and talks to kids or to teaches or gets in front of people and educates and speaks about these things. I never had an issue doing that. It's just I've never been a real big people person. And so, I finally have found what I believe to be as my passion. And I kind of got into this a little bit kind of later in the game, not only in life. A lot of people have their start, in their teens, if not younger, and then really get into it into their early 20s. I didn't really get going until I was, in my mid to late 20s, really got going until I was 30, which is absolutely scary to say out loud. But, when I got into this, I saw the people on YouTube, the Brian Barcheks and the Brian Cuscos of the world that have been doing it for a while, and they made it really popular. That they kind of helped kind of revolutionize and reshape the industry as a whole, not only because of their social media presence, but how they did it successfully monetarily. And because, this is America, this is where we live, money is the driving force behind everything. And, that is also a big part of what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. But I guess I'm kind of starting to ramble. I was going to do this a lot better last night. But, it was probably about 1 o'clock in the morning at that point, and I was getting really tired, and I was still wrapping up some other stuff. And I was just kind of talking to myself out loud. I was doing this. But so, as anyone listening knows, or should at this point, that the reptile hobby industry, whatever you want to have, you essentially keeping these animals is under essentially constant, I guess you could say, attack from legislative bodies, and certain other groups where a lot of these groups where their end goal is to have no animals in captivity under any circumstance. Private pets, cats and dogs, livestock, zoological facilities, animal research, anything like that. I mean, even for some of these groups, like wildlife rehab, it should just be nature should take its course. Humans should have absolutely no influence or focus on that whatsoever. And they have a lot of money to kind of help sway their way. As we said, the money makes the world go round, especially here in this country. And because they're very good at advertising, it feels good to help give money to these groups that are supposedly to help animals. And a part of me wants to oh yeah, no, that's absolutely, we want to do that, but anybody at this point, we've probably know who I'm referring to at this point, where essentially their motto is, better dead than in human hands or in bondage, is the way they think of things a lot of the times. And they have proven that time and time again. But because they have a pretty message that people not in the know, or even people who don't ever even need to hear more than, or see anything more than, a 5-word inflammatory, article or headline. That's all it takes. And then that's money in their pockets, and they can help push their agenda, because it doesn't matter what politician, what level of government, from city, county, all the way up to federal, money is what drives their choices most of the time. Money and power. It doesn't matter which politician it is. That's how it works. They all are like that to some degree. Everyone has a price, and they have a big wallet to dive into. And so at this point, we all know what I'm talking about. This most recently happened about the Lacey Act amendments that were put into what was at that point called the Competes Act, which later was reconciled into both the House and the Senate and was called the CHIPS Act or something like that. And there was a lot removed, including those Lacey Act amendments, which were almost literal copy and paste from other Lacey Act amendments, as well as other different ones that have been trying to pass, both state-wise and federally as well. And everyone's giving themselves a good pat on the back, and honestly, rightly so. USARK, which essentially acts as our kind of reptile industry lobbyist group. They did a tremendous job of putting out the word, letting us know what was going on, keeping people in the loop, for the most part. And there was actually a time during one of the congressperson's speeches. It was literally USARK's jargon and words that were being repeated back about why they needed to be removed from legislation. So it did help put our voices out there. It really did. However, that was not the first, and it most certainly won't be the last. And USARK does a good job of letting us know things about the alerts of potentially changing legislation and laws in different counties, different cities, everything like that. But there is something that these guys have been fighting to do this for quite some time, and reptiles make an easy first one. And I shouldn't even say that this is really the first one. So I mean, keeping any animals for a long time, there's always been kind of this weird catch-22 with that, which is keeping them, is that necessarily the best for the animal, for the environment, and different things like that. But there are some animals that, there is no denying or arguing that, especially in private individual hands, very problematic to keep both for the animals, for the people, and for the communities that they're in. And so, 15, 20 years ago, when a lot of this really started to get in place, before, back in like the wild, wild west eras of like the 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s, where a lot of people could have kind of whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted. They started to really kind of crack down on some of those things. It started with, the big cats and bears, and, and primates, even wolves, and a lot of times. And that's, that's probably a good thing, in all honesty. Like, big cats, probably, like, an individual shouldn't have a big cat, honestly. It's like even zoos and zoological facilities and wildlife parks, it's a lot. And so from there, they move on to a very easy target, which is the reptile community, and keeping reptiles and reptiles in general, and amphibians and things like that, where, they've essentially been demonized by virtually every culture, for centuries at one point or another. Really everyone, and there are some exceptions here and there, but for the most part, we all can pretty much agree that, specifically snakes, have all been very demonized, and their ties to different religions about how they're evil and things like that. How even in common phrases, when someone says you're a snake, they're not a good guy, they're a liar, they're a cheat, and that's not going away. And so what they're doing is they're using reptiles as that first foothold, and then they get in there, and then they can get in and move to other, individual ones. And they have a really good, as I said before, a really good advertising system for that, and they've been able to do so very easily. And they've definitely, seems like they're really putting their foot on the gas, and I think I have a feeling as to why that is. And that's because keeping reptiles is becoming very popular, because of what happened with COVID and the pandemic. A lot of people got pets. A lot of people, and I really got my started into a lot of this with dogs and rescues with dogs, and I still have some people that I know in that world that it's not good. Shelters are filling up because a lot of people got dogs and cats, during the pandemic, and when they were home, and then after everything kind of started to settle down to what we were being forced back into normalcy. A lot of people gave up their animals, and so shelters are overcrowded. But they found that reptiles, they didn't have to do that because they don't take up as much space. They don't have to go for walks. They don't need a bunch of exercise. They do very well being left alone, as most of them, as just as well as being interacted with. And so reptiles is becoming increasingly popular to be kept, as well as the rise of social media. You're seeing a lot more. I'm probably going to throw this word out a lot, normalcy, and a lot of normalization of people keeping reptiles, to where you're seeing a lot of people have bearded dragons, a lot of people have ball pythons, a lot of people have crested geckos. And it's almost, it's like every other person, it seems like sometimes, where someone either has one or, just the other day, I was at Home Depot picking some stuff up, and they go, "Hey, aren't you that snake guy?" And I was in the small little town, like 2 hours from where even in my little small town, because I happened to stop by to do like a tiny, like little reptile presentation in another group, for a little celebration they were having, and someone recognized me from that. And so now even, when I'm talking to people, and they ask what I do the animal reptile, stuff where I currently live. They're like, "Oh, like the gator farm," because I live pretty close to Colorado gators. I'm like, well, kind of, but not exactly. But that's about it. But otherwise, when I'm outside of, this immediate area, it's, "Oh, that's really cool. Oh yeah, my kid was doing this," or, "Oh, my partner knows somebody about like that," or like, relatives who have these animals, which is really cool. But I think that might be the reason why, legislation to try to regulate and remove a lot of the ability to keep these animals is really being, the gas is being floored on them right now. And that is because, the more popular they get, the harder it's going to be to shift public opinion to try to get people to move away from that. And that is definitely one of their biggest things. And so that's, essentially for this fight to, remove our ability to keep these animals has always been kind of like a two-prong approach. And just recently in the last couple of years, they actually have three now. The first one is, public. I should say, let me rephrase. The first one is environmental. So there's always an issue with keeping exotic animals, whatever you want to classify as an exotic animal. I mean, heck, we could even say that, like, a cat outside is technically considered an exotic animal. But there's always been this thing where, either due to human error, people being bad keepers and owners, or natural disasters, to where animals that aren't from native habitats are introduced to ecosystems, and they do damage for sure. Um, and South Florida, for instance, is I understand that bringing that up, especially in this community, it's a whole thing, but we cannot argue that there aren't dozens of invasive species there. We could, argue that, human industry is much more of an impact, that, cats outdoors are much more of an impact, that pollution and things like that are a bigger impact on the environment than invasive species, even the Burmese pythons and, the Nile monitors and tegus and stuff. But we can't deny that they are there and they're not supposed to be. And that's where, as someone who does love the environment and does want to preserve natural ecosystems, I often find myself kind of like fighting and arguing with myself when I see, they're always inflammatory, but, the headlines of, the biggest Burmese python ever caught out of the Everglades, and it's euthanized and dissected. And, I go, well, I mean, it's not their fault they're there. They're just trying to do what they do. They're just trying to exist and live. Why do we have to kill it? But then also it's like, they're really not supposed to be there, and just them doing what they're trying to do is harmful to the things that are supposed to be there. And, I also know, because I have acquaintances in the zoological field, where, even catching even smaller Burmese pythons and other animals, even zoos can't really house a lot of them. And giving them or even selling them to private individuals isn't necessarily the smartest thing to do. And then it also comes back to money, just like everything else, where it is much cheaper and more cost effective to euthanize those animals than it is to try to do some other alternative. And so, like the pragmatist, the realist part of my brain goes, well, I mean, but then the other part of me that loves animals, that loves snakes, that loves reptiles, I go, well, it's not their fault. And that's the technique that these groups have been using for, at this point, decades, to make sure that it is kept up in the public opinion that they're bad, they're not supposed to be there, that they shouldn't be keeping them. And then the other one is, it's the keeping part. It's the impact of public opinion, not just in the not in the environmental part, but the ethics of keeping them. And this is honestly what I think is going to become our biggest fight to come ever. That's going to happen in the next year and a half or so, and I'll tell you why. And they've, at this point, we've all seen, the kind of slash and burn quick documentaries we've seen about, people who go to the reptile shows and insinuate that the small little, like, holding containers that we have just for those weekends or even for the day, that's how they spend their whole lives. That they spend their lives in horrible conditions, and they would go to, like, large breeding facilities before, people really figured their stuff out, and they saw not great conditions for things, and they were perpetuated by certain individuals that they thought they weren't doing anything wrong because either laziness or ego or whatever it was. And so there's, a smear campaign essentially on the reptile community. And we are not good at showing otherwise, in all honesty. We're really not. And that's that kind of two-prong approach that they've been using to, essentially do that is, the impacts on the environment, even in places like, Colorado, where if a ball python or a boa gets out, or a Burmese or retic or whatever, it's not lasting very long. It's too dry, it's too cold, sometimes it's too hot. But they still use that in places like here, like Minnesota, like Wisconsin, like Anchorage, like Alaska. It's really crazy, but they use that argument, and it's, you can't be denied that they are very hardy animals, and there's that impact. And the other one is just, it doesn't look good. It really doesn't look good, and that is what I think is going to be our biggest fight. Is, so we all watched The Tiger King, right? Even if you didn't watch The Tiger King, you know what it was about. That documentary started at Tom Crutchfield's place. He was there for Tom Crutchfield. A bigger, scarier, crazier story just by coincidence happened while he was there. But he was there for Tom. He was there for the reptile industry. It opened with Tom and some of his snakes while he was working with some of his hot snakes. And a guy in a van with a snow leopard in his van happened to show up to pick up like a couple gaboon vipers or something from Tom, or something like that. I don't remember the exact specifics, but he was there for the reptile community. He'd been working on it for a while. And since then, since The Tiger King, obviously it's wildly successful and famous. Didn't help him get out of jail, but that's what happened. But since then, he's still working on the reptile one. He's talked to other people. He's talked to other, I don't want to call them leaders, but he's talked to other very prominent figures in our circles. He's done interviews with them, and there is no way that it will not be shaped that we are being, flippantly dangerous and careless. Probably mostly talking about, the giant snakes and the monitors and the venomous snakes. But there's no doubt in my mind that they're also going to talk about, the shows. The term flesh peddler gets thrown around, where we're just, we're selling living, breathing animals for profit, which not 100% an accurate statement, where that's what's going to be framed. And because the way how media works now, that will shape public opinion. And so they will have the environmental approach, and they've had that down pat, and we've never really successfully managed to argue or come to a middle ground on that one. They have been fairly successful at fighting the smear campaign, our public image, because we're not good at it. We're really not. They've been pretty good about that, and then they're going to slam dunk it in with this. There will be a Reptile King. There will be a Viper King Netflix series. There's going to be one. There's no arguing it. It's being worked on right now. And then now they have the third one, like I mentioned before, and that's because of the pandemic. Since humans have started to domesticate animals and be around them, there has been an increase of diseases that we can catch, communicable diseases between those animals and people, called Zoonic Diseases. There has been a steady increase of them as time has gone on, from the earliest times of us, taming down wolves to dogs and carrying and, taming down jungle fowl to chickens and taming for cattle and things like that. There's been an increase up until now. And, there's still a lot of stuff, tied to pangolins and bats and all these other things that have the potential crossover from human to, or from animal to human, as pathogens that could always be the start of the next pandemic. And now they're using that too. And that has come up several times. Even during the pandemic, it came up, where they were using that as a reason to be able to reenact the Lacey Act and then create that black and white list, where at any time they can say this is now illegal. They tried to do that. It got shot down. It's come up a couple different times in different states. Traveling acts where, just taking it back and forth from where you live to the vet, teacher in school, to what I do, all that would become illegal. And they've tried to do that multiple times in a lot of different states. And I think federally They even tried to do that once or twice too. But they have a really good strategy and really good, info to back up their side. And there is no doubt in my mind that stuff's going to change dramatically and radically. Um, Anyone who is unaware, there's stuff going on in South Florida, in Florida, where essentially they are creating a black and white list, and that they've already put out animals that were going to immediately be removed, immediately be illegal to be kept under really any private circumstance, and then ones that are up for debate or topic. Those include red-tailed boas, a lot of cichlids, both African and South American, ball pythons, African clawed frogs. A lot of our very commonly kept pets are on that list in South Florida. And, USARK Florida is trying to do their best. They are openly now being able to challenge some legislation going on there. But I think, in all honesty, Florida might be done in the long run. And not even in the long run, in the next, 5 years, I think Florida might be done. Which is really messed up. And that kind of brings me to my next point, which is, USARK. And I'm not going to sit here and downgrade what USARK has done. I donate to USARK. I have two different memberships to USARK, because they really are the only ones that are fighting for us. They really are. They're the ones who try to keep us in the loop. They're the ones who do and have really rallied us together. And there are some other industry leaders out there that have also really stepped up to help spread that word a whole lot more, that aren't nearly as controversial as some other people have and are still. But USARK has always been really more pushing for the economic side of it. And not to say that they don't do other things or that this is bad by any means, but a lot of their points, of like their pre-done emails, that we copy and paste, and they make it very easy and very quick and convenient for us to email our Congress people, which is great, absolutely. Again, not knocking on USARK at all, but it's always been in more of like the American jargon, which obviously makes it very palatable for, politicians, where it's about money, where it's about individual rights. And that is a good thing, and it has worked. It's worked here in Colorado. It obviously worked for this. It worked for the Lacey Act. It worked for this last Competes Act. It's worked in at least a dozen states, and none of that is incorrect either. But that's one. That's one of those three prongs. The other one is the big environmental impact that can't be ignored. As well as now the public opinion slander campaign that will be the Viper King, or whatever we're going to call it, until it comes out. And that's not going to be enough. And honestly, I don't think it was enough. And, we've kind of done this to ourselves, being very flippant about how we've been keeping them and then advertising it. But, I think that what's going to happen now is, like I said, stuff's going to change. And I really think when that documentary comes out, that's going to be the nail in the coffin, that we've kind of helped build for ourselves, where there will be laws passed, and it's going to dramatically change the landscape of this hobby. And I think what we need to do as a community are a couple different things. And I'm not saying this is what we all need to go out and do right now, but I think these are some things that I think would be very beneficial for us, which is, just how we present ourselves. So at least on a majority, I feel like, and it is growing. We've started to recognize that, blanket and umbrella statements and laws and things like that, I don't like under really any circumstance, but we've kind of realized that rack systems, while necessary for the hobby to continue to grow and expand, aren't necessarily the best, and definitely not the best look or image. The very minimalistic sanitary keeping, Not to say that, your enclosure should ever be dirty and they shouldn't be clean or anything like that. Um, but that kind of like, medical grade sterility, that got very popular because it could, for a very long time. We've started to, take steps away from that. And I feel that there definitely are quite a few people out there that have recognized that, including some of like the bigger name people, um, have stepped away from that. But I really feel that more people need to, like, I've even watched a lot of their videos and stuff. They've changed their tunes about it, but they really need to start pushing it more, I feel. I mean, I do as best as I can, but I'm a little guy on YouTube. Um, I'm not invited to the big stuff, and I don't have millions of followers, and I don't make all of my money off of ad revenue from YouTube. And I understand that they have bills to pay. Animals are expensive, and understand why they do that. But I feel that if a lot of those people in the community as a whole really start to push more for that, to push the online and presenting image of our hobby, that's going to do a lot. And I really feel like we really need to get on it. We don't show the rack systems as much, or if we do, we're advocating for, larger tubs. We're advocating for more enrichment inside, changing things up for them, being able to show that reptiles do have a lot of cognitive function. That needs to happen, as well as a lot of like the feeding videos, specifically the live feeding videos. I mean, those get so much traction, and they don't look good from the outside at all. And I know people have a lot of opinions about that one for sure, but I really feel that that's a big one that I think we need to move away from, in all honesty. And the last one is definitely the biggest one, I think, what we need to do. Um, and that's the big snakes and the venomous. Um, and again, this is not me saying that people shouldn't be able to have these. We just need to be a lot more aware about this. Is that I think, outside the community, we've recognized that those giant, very heavily overweight, obese retics aren't healthy. It's not a good look. Um, but there's a couple people, and again, we know who I'm really talking about. I don't think they're gonna change because that's how they make their money. But I think if as a whole, if we really push to move away from that, not necessarily to like ostracize the person, or even to to push for like animal cruelty things, because I don't know if that's necessarily the best tract for that. But if we really as a whole just kind of like shun it a little bit, I think that'd be really good. And then the free handling the hots, man. I understand that they're absolutely intelligent, personable animals. They can be, that they don't want to envenomate if they don't have to. Like it's a legitimate statement that they don't want to do it. They only do it to feel if they feel threatened. A keeper of most species with working with an animal, snake, cat, horse, dog, whatever, they can build trust to where they can safely do that. But, you know, mistakes happen, accidents happen, confusion can happen on the part of both the keeper and the animal, and bites happen a lot. And there are very prominent people who the bites have happened, and they're still making videos of it. And it's very detrimental to the image of the hobby. And I know it sounds like I'm really harping on this, and I'm trying to be, like, well, let's, just a couple people, or you're just talking about like how things look outwardly, but that's how the world views things. It's those select, very popular individuals. It's no one deep dives even for stuff that directly affects them. They don't even read the full article. They just read the headline, maybe the first line. That's all that people do. So I think that we need to really concentrate and focus on our image. Better animal keeping in the racks, better no more free handling. We talk a lot more about, animal welfare, a lot more enrichment, and it is happening. It's changing. I see a lot. As I mentioned earlier, I do talk to a lot of people. There's there is this one. His name's Phil Leitz. He's from Arids Only. He's here in Colorado, and we've spoken a couple times. Even try to do like a little educational event. And talking to him, he definitely has a lot of very similar ideas. And actually, he's been on another podcast that more than likely you also listen to, the Animals at Home podcast. He's been on a couple of that one. And he's even starting another podcast with with a partner under kind of like the Animals at Home like podcast or broadcast network, whatever the terminology is for that one. But they are definitely on the idea of pushing for moving forward with the hobby, where they're definitely trying to push the hobby and keeping in a much more positive direction, that I think that if a lot of people kind of got on board with, from little people like me all the way up to the big boys, that I think it could really save this hobby. And not to say that I don't think nothing will change, because I think it's too late. I really do. Stuff's going to change. And absolutely go listen to the podcast that Phil is on, Animals at Home, if you don't listen to that one, or it's on YouTube too. You should absolutely check that out. They're much more successful than I am, for a very good reason. But I think that a lot of those ideas are what is needed to do so. And the other thing that I think that this hobby really needs to do, and maybe this is something that we need to discuss with USARK a little bit more. And this is something that, a little bit more personal, I should say, is that, as I mentioned before, they always really push more for the monetary aspect, the money aspect, the business, the loss of business, and the rights of keeping. Like, that always sits weird with me personally, where rights are a really weird thing, especially these days. They get thrown around a lot, where rights are concrete, unchangeable, immovable, that we're all born with for sure. Like, nothing can change that. And even if it's for the detriment, it's still a good thing. And I think there's a lot more gray area to that, where, especially with what we're talking about with keeping animals, to where I think that no one should have, not necessarily the inability to have the animals to keep them, but for some species, for venomous, for crocodilians, for monitors, for the big constrictors, I think it should be a little bit more difficult, and more hoops that they should go through to be able to actually have them. And I kind of touched on this a little bit about in my video, where, retics, because of, the morphs and stuff, they've gone the route of the ball python, where they're just too popular. Keeping a retic isn't the same as keeping a ball python by any means. They're an entirely different animal. And a retic is a big enough animal to be a danger to someone's health if they're careless about handling and keeping them. And so that's where, this is going to be the part where it seems like a lot of people, and, for the most part, I actually don't deal with too much hate. Probably because I'm not very popular, which is a blessing and a curse, I guess you could say. To where a lot of the negativity that I get my way isn't as bad as what I see a lot of other people get. A lot of it's on race, honestly. But when I make a statement like where I feel it should be more regulated, to where you should be able to keep them, but it should be more difficult, almost like certain firearms. That's where I lose people. That's where people start to get mad or tune off, to where you should still have the ability to do so, but you shouldn't have. I don't know if you should have the right, where it's, it's 100% your right. You're entitled to any kind of gun, any kind of reptile or animal, because of the issues of safety to yourself, to your community and to, in the case of reptiles, the reptiles themselves, to where a lot of these very popular animals are not being kept properly, and they're not, and the information out there to keep them properly is also bad. Like savanna monitors. How many people feed rats to their adult savanna monitors? And, how many people keep Asian water monitors in 5-6 foot cages? How many people keep retics in 6-foot cages? There's so many. There's so like I vented one show in Texas, and I was walking by a table, and on their table they had baby morlets, crocodiles, gaboon vipers, and a couple copperheads on the table, like next to like a pastel ball python, and that freaked me out. And I just don't think it's not good for the longevity and safety of this community, in my opinion. Again, to reiterate, this is my opinion, but I feel that a lot of my ideas and views are kind of shared with a good majority of the hobby. And I know that a lot of places are starting to look outside of the hobby for ideas of how to improve it. Like VivTech, Ryan and Erica McVeigh, who started up a reptile, essentially lighting company that worked even with people outside the country to get LED lights that could be safe for the reptiles, that could put out the proper wavelengths of UVA and UVB without detrimental UVC that lasts longer. They're working on systems that can almost like coral reef tanks, to where it can be controlled, to where it can be almost like an app down the road where you can just plug in, like Crested Gecko, and you have all the equipment, and then you just press go essentially, and then it will be able to take care of the lighting, the temperature, the misting and stuff, where all you have to do is just monitor the water level for your misting system and give them food essentially, and it takes care of it for you, which is really cool. And I think that's what we really need, and I think that's what's going to happen a lot down the road in this hobby, is that we're with the onset of the popularity of ball pythons and morphs, even with the Burmese python, because I think that was the big starter, was the albino Burmese python, and then the albino, and then the pied ball python a few years later. That's what really did it. Reptile keeping in this country and around the world lost a lot of diversity, where people who are working with a lot of different species, different localities, even some morphs that probably weren't fully realized as morphs, they gave up and switched to ball pythons to chase that dollar, to be able to still work with animals, to do what they love, but still take care of their families. We lost a lot, and a lot of it may not be coming back. And I'm seeing a small resurgence of some stuff. I'm seeing a lot more colubrid locality stuff, which is really, really cool. But I think what's going to happen is we're going to lose a lot. We're going to lose the ability to keep or to import in a lot of new species. The total number, I think, is going to go down. And what's going to be the new start-off kicking point level of care and husbandry requirements are going to be much higher. We're going to see a lot more larger enclosures. We're going to see a lot more open front PVC type enclosures. We're going to see not as many small ones. A lot more UVB, a lot more choices, I think, for the care and the technique, and to hone our ability to keep them properly, which will be good. But again, I think we're going to lose some species, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult, I think. And then here's the trade-off, which is, and it was honestly highlighted in Dave Kaufman's new video, where he went to Africa to go see ball pythons in the wild, which started off a whole new tide of arguments about ball pythons and trees and stuff, and them being semi-arboreal and all this stuff, which I'm not going to touch that. But he did bring up a very good point, which that I had known about, because I talked to people who were in the wholesaling import part of our community, which is there are not enough ball pythons being bred in this country to keep up with the demand for ball pythons, at least in the United States, and they're being shipped across seas a lot. If the day comes and China allows that, like a lot of colubrids get shipped to Japan and China, but China, you can't bring in ball pythons. If China opens up and says you can have ball pythons, it'll explode all over again. But just in this country, just for people wanting their first pets, wanting to chase the pyramid scheme that is morphs, there aren't enough being bred in the States. There really aren't. Which sounds insane. All you see are ball pythons at shows, at stores, at everywhere. That's all you see. But there's always demand for them. And that's why importation still happens. And as Dave Kaufman highlighted, the day that the importation dries up, people that come from the countries, and this isn't just ball pythons, this is places in Central and South America, places in Indonesia area, Papua New Guinea area, parts of Southeast Asia, where a big part of how a lot of people are able to put food on the table for their families is the catching and farm raising and hatching of all these different snakes and then selling them to the United States, in Canada and other places too. But what's going to happen is, the argument that, it's bad for the environment and they are over harvesting, which is not an incorrect argument to say. A lot of times they do get over harvested, both legally and illegally in a lot of these places. I'm not saying that at all. But when the legal part goes away, they will go back to the skin market, to the skin trade. The skin market took a huge dive with the onset of that. I mean, it was like a close to $1 billion, if not $1 billion, trade throughout a lot of the 20th century. And then with the onset of the popularity of reptiles, even crocodilians, huge loss in that market, in that industry. And people will do what it takes to be able to feed themselves and their families. And so because of that, what happens to those animals? And obviously, as someone who cares about animals, who loves animals and snakes, particularly Dave Kaufman definitely did, I don't want to say played it up by any means, but definitely really focused on that part. But it's true, though, is that's going to happen in a lot of places where if, like, Burmese pythons are no longer able to be, and reticulated pythons are no longer able to be brought into this country. But if something were to happen where we're no longer able to keep them, illegal poaching will happen more. And then that will be the true end of wild Burmese pythons in Asia, of wild reticulated pythons in Asia, where we are no longer able to keep them really sustainably, where they can't travel in and out, where the big places that we are allowed to have them, where more cities and states are putting limits or species limits on size or whatever, the illegality of smuggled and poached animals will uptick, and then the endangered animals will, that could be the nail in the coffin for them. I think that maybe more moderation of the amount of imports of certain species and from some areas, like what happened in Madagascar, is there's not a whole lot of imports coming in from Madagascar anymore. There may never be again either. There probably will be, but that's dramatically decreased. But Madagascar is another kind of special case where there's not a whole lot of land left either. So we could see a lot of species go the way of the dodo because of hunting and because of human growth. But I think that, between the skin trade and then the illegal poaching, because there's this weird thing that this is also part of the skeevy thing that gets to me with people, specifically in this country. where it's, if you can't have it, you want it. And even I had that kind of knee-jerk reaction when a very real possibility of the Lacey Act being reenacted. I was like, I need to get a couple dwarf retics where I know I can safely and responsibly house 2 to 3 less than 12-foot animals. I can do that, but I don't want more than that. But I don't want the species to go away. I had that reaction. I think a lot of people did too. That's probably why dwarf retics are as popular as they were. Is that when that went away, people are like, okay, I'm going to get this either to make sure they don't go away or for the hope of eventual ability for like the sustainability of them comes back. And that's that weird thing that people have where if you can't have it, if you're not supposed to have it, you got to have it. And that'll happen again, as well as again that kind of like entitlement right, which that's been the one part like about USARK that I've always been like, which is the right to keep things, because I fall into that category of like, well, absolutes aren't great. God-given or fundamental rights, it's really complicated, and I'm not a big fan of it under a lot of circumstances, and they can be very problematic in a lot of ways. And so that's why, in the video that I did about not wanting to get rid of them but to make it harder or for them to not be as popular, I think I did a good job of highlighting that. That some reasonable discussed research, laws and relegations and legislation and regulations are probably needed. And we do need USARK. We really do, and I do support USARK. But I really feel they need to really think about, and not just USARK, all of us too. We really need to start thinking about, captive breeding, and sustainable populations, and reasons why we still need this. Not only the ability to keep the animals, and not just like, the big 10 of like, ball pythons, leopard geckos, cresties, those things. But a large variety of them. We really need to start pushing as to why not only do we need the ability to keep them, but why this whole industry is important. Like, there's a lot of reasons why I think reptiles are almost like mystical to a lot of people. And I feel like, at least in my case, I can really relate to an animal that always kind of has like a nose down looked at opinion from a lot of society, to where they're always, demonized, as I said before, always looked down at, always thought the worst of, when they're just trying to be themselves and just trying to get by. And the little bit of time and energy and effort into them, into understanding them, is something I can really relate to. And that's really about the only time I ever open up either, is talking about reptiles and snakes in particular. I'm definitely a snake guy. And I would like to, be able to share my passion and knowledge for them and try to be a better example for a lot of people. And not to say I'm perfect by any means. Like, again, not a big presence online. And like my most popular video is a video from a couple years ago where I showed off my essentially gecko and Asian rat snake room, where a lot of the cages, they're small subadult cages, but I have adult animals in them because I just didn't know better. I fell into the same trappings that a lot of people did, where an adult ball python can be kept in a tiny little tub, that a crested gecko can be kept in a tiny little thing. And I didn't have, I had snakes in there that were in quarantine because I didn't have a better quarantine facility, so they're in like smaller tubs than I normally would be. But I think I explained that away a little bit, not away, but explained it. But it doesn't look good for what I'm trying to put out there, and it does kind of bum me out that that's my most popular video. And even with some of the other videos that I've done where I show like different ways of doing setups and stuff, they're always smaller ones. And then the newer ones that I've done since then in the years, following that, they're larger. They're more. There's a lot more enrichment for them. There's more options for them. Those never do as well. And that really bums me out a little bit. That like I'm probably most well known for, at least on the YouTube space, for some reason, 5 beginner amphibians, which honestly weren't the best choices. I just went with 5 ones that could be good, and honestly, thinking about it, there could have been like 10 other ones that might have been better ones for that video. And then that one, which is, I'm slowly phasing out the number of geckos that I have because I want to do better by the animals that I do have, and give them more and larger for them. And that's what I try to advocate and push for. Like, for a long time when I would do the reptile shows, either vending for the very small amount of animals that I produce, or just doing educational shows, I would have a display out, like a 3-foot, like a 40-gallon size, but a PVC one, open front one. And I have it all decked out, and I would sit there and I would have like a shopping list on top, and I would say, this is what you need for, your baby boa, your baby corn snake, ball python, whatever, for depending on the species for the first few years. But, for a pet, this is not an adult size enclosure for a corn snake, for a ball python, certainly not a boa, or really any of the species that are commonly kept. I'd always advocate for larger, but I would say, this is a way you could do it. And I would never really advocate for rack systems, even though I use them. But I try not to be the giant hypocrite. The do as I say, not as I do crowd, where I have the larger tubs, the large racks. I'm looking over at them as I'm talking, to where, I'm having to go out and buy melamine, which I'm not the biggest fan of by any means, because I do have larger racks to where, 90% of probably 99% of any other ball python breeder still uses, 41 quart or the V70 tubs for their adult animals. And I'm using 74 quarts, which is, close to twice the size. So they would have, 2 to 3 times the number of animals in the space that I have, of just the space allocated for the breeding animals that I have. Not counting the boas or yang in the larger enclosures, not counting the indigo in the larger enclosure, but just the space allocated, like the one wall that I have, not even the full wall, they would have probably upwards of, 500-600 animals. I don't have that many. And so that's what I like to push for, and I would like to see a lot more people really start to do that, to take almost a more of like a personal reason as to why they do it, why they love it, and things like that, I know this seems kind of like a bit of a downer, and there's a good chance that, when I mentioned like the gun thing, a lot of people checked out, but the fact of the matter is that things are going to change, and it's going to be probably very radically different very quickly. That stuff that we did back in the day that we never made enough effort to really change, of how cavalier we were about stuff. We kind of set our own fate a little bit. And I don't know what all will be said in that documentary, and I know I keep coming back to that, but I really do feel that'll be it. I don't think it's going to go away, because especially in this country, we don't like to cure things. We don't like to get rid of things. We like to treat them. We like to maintain them because there's money in it. So I don't think the reptile industry is ever going to go away, but I think it's going to be very different. It'll probably be much more regulated. And I feel that like right now, and the momentum has started, specifically, with like Garrett from Research Reptiles really heading up that USARK YouTube channel, and other creators getting in on that, and influencers and people in industry leaders and prominent figures are getting into that a little bit. I feel like the momentum has started, that now is the time that we really need to figure out our multi-prong defense. And that's really what it is too. It's we are defending our ability to keep these animals and defending the reasons why we need to keep them, like a lot of people talk about the Invisible Ark, which was this book that actually I'm gonna, where is it? Right here. I think it's so this book right here, The Invisible Ark, written by Dave and Tracy Barker. For people who don't know, that's the VPI. So the people who like boas, the VPI boas, that's the Barkers. They are cornerstones of our hobby, in all honesty. They wrote this book, and they talk about how, keeping in captivity, we've shown that private keepers are sometimes significantly better at breeding and maintaining a lot of different species of a lot of different species in herpetoculture than even many zoos have. And because of the onset of human hubris and growth in industry, that we're going to lose wild populations, and that, because of, us here, the animals in private hands in captivity, in this country and around the world, create an invisible ark. So that way, eventually, once we realize, because it's always too late for us, we always find it too late. We could still have animals, either that we'll have in captivity, or potentially could be released again in the wild someday. And I don't know if the Invisible Ark is truly going to be a thing for a lot of our species, but there is a very real probability that, for some of these animals, it will be, or the only animals will be in the hands of these private keepers, especially if it becomes illegal to import them. And then the poaching will happen, the skin trade will happen, in cases like, in Africa, the Bushmeat Trade, where people in other industries, the workers are essentially used as, slave wages, to where they can't afford to buy food, so the only food they can eat are animals from the bush. And that could happen with a lot of different reptiles too, to where they're just over hunted for food, for skin, for things like that, to where the only animals left will be in the hobby, and the ability to sustainably keep them will also go away, and we're going to lose a lot. And I don't really want that to happen, so that's why I really feel that public opinion is something that we have a much better chance of affecting. Because right now, the groups that are really trying to take that away have the money to line the pockets of politicians. They have the public opinion of the environment and of, animal abuse on their side. And I really feel that USARK will continue to be like our main fighting force. They will be our uniter, unless we can really get everyone on board. And I mean everyone, and that includes people that we don't necessarily always agree with. People that, especially in the past, for sure, have done a lot of not great stuff, but are now advocates for better keeping and for the betterment of community. And a lot of those big people now are still not setting a very good example. We're still actively promoting a lot of stuff that I think isn't very good for the hobby. It's not good for that. And again, I know this is all just my opinion, and I'm just talking at this point. I'm trying not to ramble too much, but I think I got it all down. But that's what's coming. You don't have to like my opinion. You don't have to like my points. You don't have to agree with them, but it's coming. And we kind of did a lot of it to ourselves. And unless we really do come together, we're going to lose a lot more than what we could. We could still probably hold on to a lot. Probably have a little bit more freedom for us to figure out on our own before we have to adapt to it, or we get a lot of articles, a lot of headlines of released animals, a lot of cichlids and piranhas and pacus and ponds, a lot more. A lot more ball pythons on the jogging trails. A lot more snakes and Wendy's and McDonald's and stuff. We're going to see a lot more of that if that happens, because that's the very first thing that happens when blanket and umbrella bans happen, is that people just release their animals. Or people become criminals for it. And we don't want that. So, I don't know, maybe message a lot more of those really more popular people. Tell them to really push for more. Tell them to talk about this more. Check out the Animals at Home podcast. Not just the ones with Phil. Not just the ones, because I'm pretty sure I saw, I got a little notification that they had one, about something very similar to what I'm talking about now. Go check that out if you haven't. This is definitely becoming a solo podcast, over an hour at this point. But you should absolutely go do that and, talk to, message that and talk to people too. If there's a local reptile show in your town coming up, go to it. Show some support, talk to people, learn more. You hear people, it's kind of the same thing with a lot of other stuff. If you hear people saying things to the detriment of things, you don't need to sit there and butt into conversations and go, it's venomous, not poisonous. But, silence is complacence. You don't have to sit there and confront random people, or you don't even have to confront your family necessarily. But, not saying, just standing by, in comment sections and Facebook groups and stuff, that's kind of become the norm now, is that people will just kind of scroll on by or ignore stuff. And so, negativity and hate has really been allowed to really get a foothold into our lives again. And I feel with reptiles, which I know this is me being more personal about this probably, but for something that I found so late that I think I finally am a bit of a part of more, I don't want to see that lost, and I don't want to be part of a community that stands by and waits for it to happen to them individually. So that's why, even though, maybe only a couple hundred people will ever watch or hear this, hopefully those couple hundred people get something from this, and they tell a couple other people, and it spreads slowly. That's what I really would like. I'm going to do everything I can, as long as I can, to teach people, to share my knowledge and passion and love of these animals. That's really what I'm going to try to do. That's what I'm trying to do right now. But yeah, so thank you so much for sticking with me for this. It's been, especially, with all those we headlines and the USARK alerts that gets everyone into a, oh my God, panic. Which again, not getting on USARK, because we do need to know that. We need to stay in the know. But, maybe instead of the feeding videos, instead of, the egg cutting videos, it's check out this cool thing I did with my enclosure, or check it out, I got this kind of unusual species. I got this pair, I'm going to see what I can do. Or hey, or reaching out and asking for other people's opinions and stuff. I have a lot of people ask me about my legless lizards. Not to say I know what I'm really doing that well with them. I go out and I talk to people, and I get a lot of information. I try to read articles and studies, and then I share that with people who ask me what I have learned, what I'm doing currently, what seems to be working, and I'll also point them in the direction of other people who I talk to, and who I learned from. And I feel that that's also something that'd be really good to be able to see too. But again, thanks for sticking with me on this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed me, or no, I don't even necessarily mean enjoyed, but maybe got something from this, or gave you an idea for maybe doing something of your own, or a person who you want to reach out to, or something like that. I'd be more than happy to talk about these kind of things a lot more. If you know somebody that you think would be good to want to talk to, or heck, if you even, have opinions about this or ideas about this and you want to talk, I have no problem. Let's have a chat, because I really feel that even with my videos sometimes can get a little bit lengthy. These longer podcast length or full length conversations, I feel you can get a lot from, more than a minute or 3 minute TikTok or a 15-minute video that bounces around a lot. I feel like a lot of that is really beneficial. And yeah, just thanks for sticking with me if you made it this far again. I think that this could still be a really good community that, I don't know if saving is the right word, but being able to continue to do what we do and what we love, I think could still happen. It's just going to be different, and I'm honestly hoping maybe for the better. That, again, it's not going to be as easy or as available or as impulsive of acquiring and keeping these animals as it's been. But I think it might be a good thing down the road. But yeah, hope you guys got something from this. So I guess this is officially the podcast. So thanks for listening to the podcast. Keep calm, it's just a snake podcast. A couple weeks from now, we have a really cool guest that we're going to have on. We're talking about an amazing species of snake that's very difficult to keep care of in the hobby, captivity. It's going to be really cool to talk to them about, as well as another really cool project that they're working on that kind of ties into this a little bit. I think it's going to be really fun. So tune into that, and check out some of the people that I talked about today too, that have a little bit more of a wider spread, or maybe could talk about it in maybe a different way that's more palatable, or just in a different tune than I spun it. So check out the US Arc YouTube channel. Check out Reach Out Reptiles, VivTech products. I really like the VivTech products stuff, because not only is like Ryan and Erica are just like disturbingly nice people. Like it's a little unnerving how nice and open they are. But they are legitimately trying to change things and to make it to where like every individual can legitimately up their husbandry practices, and to bring it into kind of this generation of keeping to where a lot more technology based, and a lot more initial setup, but the overall maintenance and consistency of it's going to be a lot easier and a lot better maintained down the road. So go check them out too. Thanks again. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. And we will, hopefully, if I didn't turn too many people away, we will check you next time, both for the next episode of the podcast. Don't know when the next one after that will be, because I'm having trouble, finding guests to talk to. And I imagine it's probably easier and better to listen to multiple people talking, not just me ranting for over an hour in my office. But I don't know when the next one will come out, but we'll have one coming out at the beginning of September, which will be really, really cool. And after that, I'm not really sure, but if want to check out the rest of the podcasts or the YouTube channels, greatly appreciate it. And hope you got something from this. Maybe you did enjoy it, to give you something to think about. If you check out the videos, maybe you will find some stuff that you do enjoy for sure. and learn even more. And yeah, so thanks again, and we'll check you next time.